All right. We are live, I think. It says we're live, so I hope so. I want to make sure that this is recording. I think my understanding is that it records based on my settings. So let's hope that that's the case, Jen. Welcome, everyone. I'm Amanda, host of MBM Podcast, and I'm here with Jen Corley from WeTravel. And this is my first live podcast interview. I've done hundreds of them, but I've never done an interview where it's going to go on the feed later and actually have it be live. So, welcome to the show today, Jen.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm happy to be your guinea pig today, and hope it all goes smoothly with the live and the podcast. I was on your podcast. What was it? I don't know. 2016, I think. So
Yeah.
it's nice to be back, and it's nice to be back in a different format and in a different state of the world than last time we talked.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a while. I looked it up. It was you were episode 32 of MVM, which is crazy. We interviewed or it went live November 21st, I think, in 2016. So it's been like 3.5 years since you and I have had a conversation on the show.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Well, thank you for having me back. I really appreciate it. And it's fun to be doing it like sort of face to face with all of you out there. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And so since it's been, a while since we connected on the show last, can you tell me a little bit about what you've been up to over the last couple of years?
Yeah. So, well, and I guess just to backtrack a little bit for those of you that didn't read the bio in the notes or whatever, just to give a little bit of background, I work for a company called WeTravel. It's a payments and registration platform for the wellness industry and also group travel more broadly. I'm the head of the wellness division of the company, and I support individuals and small businesses that run retreats domestically, internationally, and also trainings. And so, in my role at the company is really kind of content marketing and just sort of helping retreat leaders to sort of do what they do best, and we provide all of the kind of back end tech solutions. So that's actually I've been there since 2016. That's when we originally connected on just kind of I think it was just on the topic of like retreat planning best practices. Is that right, Amanda?
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah. So that was where we were back in 2016, and then fast forward from then till now, our company I was actually like the fifth employee, I think, at WeTravel. So I joined really, really early in 2015, I think. The company's been growing a lot. We, have hired a ton of people. The product has changed a ton. Our client base has grown a ton. We've had venture capital funding, doing really well. Obviously, the last weeks and months have been tough for any company in the travel industry, so that's kind of been a little bit of a whirlwind. But on top of that, personally, just in that space, I also had I was on maternity leave for a lot of the last year because I gave birth to my first son 14 months ago, and so I have been through the whole motherhood journey, coming back to work, getting back into it, getting really excited, and then I've been back from maternity leave like 6-7 months now, and then like into the baptism by fire of like dealing with COVID as a relatively recently mom, back to work and having kids and family at home. So so this has been like a very exciting but very tumultuous time. Lots of changes, lots of highs and lows, and and we're weathering through it like anybody else in the industry, but it's tough. And part of the reason that I'm glad to be here today is just that my role is like to keep a pulse on what's going on in the retreat leader community and the wellness community. How can we help? And so, part of this is we'll get to it, the study that we put together just to try to keep a pulse on all the people we're working with, like how they're doing, what are their hopes and aspirations for how the recovery is going to look, and hopefully just providing a lens into all of that. Excited to share some of that information with everybody today.
Yeah. Thanks for catching us up. And I'm also excited to dive into that because I mean, being, both in the yoga space and then also the travel space myself, I mean, it's just been a crazy couple of months. And I don't know that any of us could have predicted this happening. And one of the things that I think is really interesting specifically about like the yoga retreat space is that one of the top business tips for running a yoga retreat is like book everything out like a year in advance. And so I think if people are kind of looking at March 2020, April 2020, and kind of all the months that are going to proceed now, I mean, there's people who have been selling their yoga retreats and having them booked for like a year, maybe even like 18 months at this point. And you just can't predict that far in advance. Like, you can't be like, oh, a year from now, there's going to be a global pandemic with a virus that we don't even know about right now. It's just impossible. So I'm definitely curious to know kind of like what the response has been like from retreat leaders, what they've been doing, and all that good stuff. So I think a good place to start would be if you could just tell myself and listeners or watchers, I guess, since they're viewing us, a little bit about the background of the study and just kind of like, what you asked them and what the study was all about.
Yeah, so pretty soon after all this hit, we realized that somewhere in the beginning of April, we're sitting in a good position to kind of pull our clients. And so for WeTravel broadly, that's a lot of different flavors of like group travel and tour operators. So that was a survey of like 500 plus respondents. 132 of those were people that we would call kind of in the yoga retreat or wellness retreat space. And so those are wellness entrepreneurs and small business people. Like I said before, they're offering domestic and international retreats, domestic and international trainings, and some other immersions, day longs, other offerings like that. But mostly it's retreat leaders of one flavor or another. Most of the people were based in North America, but we also had I think like 70% North America, and then Asia, Europe were well represented and Latin America between like 5 and 10%, and the rest were other parts of the world, including a pretty strong cohort that are digital nomads, which I think we may see people, even more of those folks cropping up after this. So yeah, so that's kind of who we profiled and who we had as respondents in the survey. And it was really interesting for me, especially to see that if you compare the group of 500 respondents that were travel very broadly and the group of 130, that the wellness and retreat respondents were kind of more, it was good to see they're kind of more resilient and creative, and that they quickly pivoted to different kinds of programming, online programming, and also they're just, I think, they tend to be more optimistic about the timing and kind of the strength of the rebound of the industry coming back. So I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic, or at least cautiously optimistic. But that's who we were profiling, and who we asked all these questions to, in terms of if that helps understand what some of these responses mean and who they're relevant to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great launching off point. And I think it's interesting too, just to consider, that there can be some positives that can come out of this, some silver linings, and also just to kind of consider like how this shifts like the travel industry in general, but specifically retreat leaders. And I think I'm sure you've seen like lots of great stuff with this, but I know I've got, a couple of friends who have been doing some pretty cool like online retreat experiences. And I have one friend who's been doing like we'll take you to a place. So the last one she did was Japan, I think it was, and everything was themed with different things having to do with the Japanese culture. But you take this like virtual retreat right from your home, and it actually makes me wonder if this is going to be something that continues afterwards, because being able to travel is a privilege in many ways, like both from expense wise and having a passport. Maybe you have a reason that you can't leave, like a family member that you need to take care of, or maybe a disability. And I think that there's, a lot of opportunities to give people the experience of going somewhere while they can still be in their home.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do, I mean, not to skip ahead to sort of like the end and the forward projections, but I will say quickly that we did see a lot of people, especially in the time frame, because these responses were collected in April. And so most of them came through in the kind of the end of April, just to give you a sense for how long ago, how dated are the responses. They're still pretty fresh, but I think especially in that first-ish month of April, there was, especially in the wellness community, because everybody was moving their classes online and exploring online platforms and getting so excited about what's possible online, that there was a whole bunch of like people thinking that they were going to move tons of their stuff online and keep it online. I think that's like retracted just a little bit, where people realize the value of being able to address, a really wide, geographically dispersed group of people by having online offerings, and also being able to, just like you said, both, cheaply and without a lot of logistics nightmare, be able to sort of like take people and immerse them in an experience virtually. That's a new frontier, and it's really exciting. I think it doesn't mean that it's going to replace in-person travel, but I think it's just a new way of thinking about things, and a new kind of like tool in our arsenals as wellness professionals, leaders, healers, teachers, retreat leaders, just to think about what can be possible, given all of the amazing technology we have, and not to mean that we're going to not travel anymore, but in times and places that we, travel's not a reality, there's some pretty cool stuff that people are coming up with that probably wouldn't have thought of if not prompted by the current situation. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's been really inspiring to see, yoga teachers that I work with and studios that I work with and, many, many other people that I don't work with personally just do these things like take their businesses online. I know I have one yoga teacher that I work with one-on-one, and she's talking for months about making a YouTube channel, and it was never the top priority for her. And then, COVID hits, and like she's like, have a YouTube channel with videos now. And I'm like, whoa, you just did the thing. And she's like, I kind of had to, and I figured it out. And now I feel
Yeah.
so excited about it. So I think it has been really cool to see the creativity, like you said, that people are doing in the way that they're just shifting. Like, I don't think, like I said before, I don't think we ever could have predicted this. And,
No.
it sucks being forced into doing something. But at the same time, I think it's brought about a lot of opportunities in the online space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So diving into the survey a little bit, I'd love to chat about, how the industry, the yoga retreat industry specifically has been impacted. When did most retreat leaders start to like feel the impact of the pandemic on their businesses?
Yeah, so I would say the results are pretty in line with what I felt, being someone living in California. Most people would say 53% said kind of early March is when they really felt that their businesses were being severely impacted. 30% felt it a lot earlier, like as early as February, and 15% on the other end of the spectrum said they didn't feel anything till late March or even into early April. And so I have to imagine that some of this variability is just, where do you live? What's the messaging of the media around you? Also, like psychologically, how risk averse are you? Are you optimistic? So I think these really early responses tend to mirror kind of when the CDC and government agencies and travel restrictions all started to kind of impose some reality. But even these respondents in April, I think there's a range of how quickly they felt it. So I think by now we can agree that we're all pretty darn impacted. But yeah, it was interesting, just kind of like how early did people start to like pivot and realize that they were going to need to make changes. There was some degree of variability, but March, early mid March seemed to be kind of the spot where the majority of people were saying, okay, gee, we really need to figure out what we're going to do in terms of next steps and how to handle this, because what we thought we were going to be able to do in 2020, at least in the first half of the year, is probably not going to go according to plan.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just funny on like when you had your trips booked for and who your demographic is, because I think there's a big difference between if your demographics maybe younger and feeling like I'm not going to be impacted that much by this virus versus if your demographics perhaps older and a little bit more cautious with those types of things. And then yeah, exactly like you said, where you're at, because it's like the world has been hit by this at very different times. And I think even now, my husband told me yesterday that now South America has been declared like the epicenter of the virus now because they have the most active cases. So they don't have the most in the world, but the most active right now. So it's like it's really moved around the world over
Yeah.
time. And it's I think too there was a lot of people like kind of as pandemic was declared from the WHO, I think there was a lot of people who were like, okay, it'll just be 14 days or maybe it'll just be a couple weeks. And I think things progressed as it was like, okay, things are not changing fast. There was a lot of people who were like, oh, this thing I planned in September maybe isn't happening now, or this thing I planned in summer isn't happening now. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to kind of think about like the timeline of it all.
Yeah, and all around the world, I think we're going to experience as we sort of come. Hopefully, we're on. We're at least looking forward to coming up and out of this. But it's probably not going to be a straight line. It's not going to be the same experience any one place in the world. There may be flare-ups, and so uncertainty is still, kind of the name of the game. But I think that degree of uncertainty that we still feel, certainly when we were, getting respondents to our surveys back in the end of April, one of the things we asked about was kind of, are you canceling? Are you postponing? And yeah, there were like various takes on that based, I think, on how deeply people were feeling kind of the shock and the reality of the pandemic hitting them at that moment. So, we asked in late April, kind of what percentage of your offerings have been canceled so far. And so half of the respondents, I think just a little bit more than half, said between 50 and 100% of their 2020 offerings had been canceled due to COVID by this time. But there's also quite a bit of, like we were just saying, there's quite a bit of variability in the responses there, just because probably it was reflecting all of these different factors. Where was your retreat going? Who's the population? What's the story in your home country? How free are you to travel? That said, the most common reasons given for the cancellations were governmental travel restrictions, personal fears about traveling due to COVID-19, and then thirdly, just the kind of overall financial impact that people, who were out of work early or realizing this was going to be a pretty significant economic event, and were concerned about, shelling out a lot of money to go on an expensive retreat, perhaps around the world. All those things came together, and people either realized, in some cases, cancellation, or in some cases, postponement was gonna be on the cards. So we saw, kind of in the weeks in the kind of May timeframe, coming out of just when the first survey results came out, just a lot of like anecdotal, I can say people were being very responsible in terms of their behavior on the whole. Retreat organizers were taking the initiative to cancel things that were kind of mid-year and even, late summer, as it kind of became clear that there wasn't going to be certainty with enough time to unwind the plans if they kept waiting. And so, yeah, we saw people continue to move towards either cancellation if they had to, or ideally postponement. And I think on the whole, they were acting in a way that they're thinking for themselves, for their local communities they were visiting, for their participants, kind of for all these stakeholders involved, like what's the right thing to do. And in a lot of cases that meant just, not taking the chance to wait for the 11th hour to decide whether to go or not. So we did see a lot of plans dissolve for kind of the rest of this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not surprised to hear that. I think like, personally with my own plans, like I was supposed to be headed to Europe right now and staying in Europe till July when I was supposed to come back for one of my best friend's weddings. And I mean, all of that's like, canceled or postponed at this point. My friend
Yeah.
postponed her wedding till next year. And fortunately, my husband and I had no plans past the summer. Essentially, we didn't know what we were going to do, if it was going to be being back in Panama or being in Canada or being, wherever in the world. And I'm grateful that we didn't have plans because, at this point, I think it's just really hard to know what's going to happen. Is it going to be okay to travel in the fall? And even if it's okay to travel in your own home country, I mean, the travel restrictions are going to have a huge, huge, huge factor in this because, for Canada, for example, right now our border is still closed and our prime minister has said that it'll likely be another 30 days before our border opens. So that's looking at like essentially July at this point. But then we currently have a 14-day mandatory travel quarantine. So if you come from out of the country, regardless of if you're Canadian, American, European, Chinese, you have to quarantine for 14 days and you get a pretty hefty fine if you don't. So, I mean, if you're looking to travel to Canada and we still have that, you gotta quarantine yourself for 14 days and then do your trip, which I think is a big deterrent to making a trip here, at least in my opinion. So, having been in the position of like this time last year, I was planning my retreat, which I used WeTravel service and it was awesome. So thank you for that. just thinking about being in that position, like I feel like I certainly, and it was in November, like I think we would certainly have postponed a year or temporarily canceled or something like that and just given the money back because I don't know, I just feel like there's so much uncertainty at this point. Like even if you feel confident in, where you're at, I think it's really hard to know what's going to play out with flights and what other governments are doing and if it's okay to go to a country. Like I was hosting my retreat in Costa Rica and I've heard that Costa Rica opened their borders to tourists, was going to, but then they got a couple more cases or something like that. So maybe now they're closed. Don't quote me on this. I don't know exactly what
Yeah.
was going on, but it seems like, countries that rely on tourism want open, but they also need to do what's best for their population, which is tough.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I was just talking to a woman who's like, well, she's lives part-time down in Costa Rica, and she was saying, she's like, "Yeah, the locals are taking it really serious here. There haven't been a lot of cases in Costa Rica, but they really want it to stay that way. They're being extremely
Mm-hmm.
conservative because they want to do everything they can to keep public health really good so that when tourism hopefully starts to come back globally, they or any other country that desires to have tourism be part of their economy is not, a hot zone in terms of COVID activity. So yeah, I think all around the world we're seeing a lot of thought and care going into how we come out of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're to that point where certainly we're not out of the woods, and I'm not suggesting that, but people are at least starting to plan, for the future and think about, for example, in the study, originally when we asked the question back in like late April, what's your kind of postponement plans? A lot of people, I think it was 43% of respondents said that they hadn't rescheduled anything yet, though they did plan to reschedule. They just didn't even have the kind of their bearings in terms of thinking about when might be possible. So I think we're seeing now that people have started to postpone kind of fall, like late fall of this year and beyond, more for domestic stuff. People are postponing or starting offerings back up around that time frame. And then I would say for postponements of international retreats, we're really looking into the first and even second half of 2021. And I think some of that is that there's a hope that that timeline provides enough buffer that the virus will be at least, somewhat under control a year on from when it originally kind of landed on planet Earth. And then also the seasonality of arrangements that if people had made, if it was high season or shoulder season or whatever, and they had this agreement worked out to punt it 1 year. Sometimes you replicate the conditions that you were going for when you first planned it, and I think that some of that's probably coming into play too.
Yeah, absolutely. That totally makes sense. We just have somebody who says, hello, hi, Facebook user. I can't see who you are. That's kind of annoying, but hello, thanks for joining us. If anyone has questions, make sure you drop them in the comments for us, and Jen and I will tackle them at the end.
Okay, great.
Um, Amazing. So I think something that I'm definitely curious about, and I feel like people watching are probably curious about, is how are people managing the refunds of the retreat, particularly when it's canceled or postponed?
Yeah, so in the majority of cases, our respondents to our survey were offering refunds. Like, so 68% offering refunds, 54% of that 68 was a just full on straight up refund. And then an additional 14 were doing refunds minus, kind of a nominal administrative fee to just cover some of their costs. Um, Beyond that, 36% are giving credit towards future offerings, 24% still negotiating, and 7%, interesting, are not giving refunds at all because they feel that their terms and conditions, protect them against this sort of event. But I would say, yeah, in the majority of cases, we're sort of considering it industry best practice where if you have participants that have paid you and you're not sure you're going to be able to deliver the services promised, probably the safest and kind of best course all around is to give them a refund, or if that's not possible, a credit towards a future offering. And yeah, and actually there's a quote here from a friend and longtime user of our platform at WeTravel. She said, it's important to be in touch with your clients and to reassure them, even if you don't have all the answers. While I try to have standard T&Cs when something like this happens, I also try to handle each guest on a case-by-case basis. this is an unprecedented time. And I think the most important thing I can do is communicate clearly and consistently to instill confidence in my guests for the future. So I think that's just well said in terms of these are uncertain times. There's a lot of people in the mix in terms of different stakeholders, the participants, the retreat leaders, the retreat centers, any like on the ground logistics providers. And we're all in this ecosystem of like, we all need each other to make our businesses run. And yeah, and so trying to make sure that we mutually navigate the best way forward that kind of keeps the industry healthy. That's kind of the best outcome that we can hope for, and hopefully what everybody's shooting for. So yeah, we are seeing a lot of refunds, but we're also seeing a lot of like creative negotiating and figuring out a way forward that will hopefully allow everybody to sustain their business and grow out of this experience, still having a business that can be rebuilt and can continue to thrive in the kind of post-COVID era.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's really interesting because, obviously the terms and conditions you have with the like your own contract, because like as a yoga teacher, you're usually working, with a retreat center or, a company that's helping you. And it's really tough if you've got, say, like 10 people registered and paid, and then the retreat center won't give you back any of your money. It's really hard to just like front all that money for like the average business. But then at
Yeah.
the same time, you want to make sure that people have good feelings about you and what you're offering and that they want to travel with you in the future. And I think that part of how you instill that confidence is like that quote says, like being in touch with people, reassuring them that they are going to get something from their money. And I think for the most part, I've heard a lot of, really touching and beautiful stories, but I've definitely heard, a couple horror stories about people losing lots of money and not getting refunds for things that they'll never get their like product or service on. And I think as much as we can, we just need to make sure that we're, delivering on what was promised.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tough time. So it's like client reactions are sort of all over the board, and that was another thing we asked in the survey. How happy are your clients or your participants or your guests relative to whatever refund, postponement, credit policies you put in place? And actually just about half of people say that their clients are pretty much across the board happy, and only
Mhm.
11% unhappy. 18% said they're not sure how people yet feel. I think that's probably because, there's these ongoing negotiations between retreat centers and between, the participants and their retreat leader hosts. And again, people just trying to kind of figure it out. Another thing, we won't get into too much, but yeah, it's like one thing as a retreat leader is you really want to protect, or you want to hopefully avoid having any of your students, file like a credit card dispute or a chargeback against you, just because that can be, detrimental for your ability to take payments in the future. Also, it's not great, interpersonal experience between you and your clients. But I think people have generally been, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think like of our client base, like more than 85% haven't experienced chargebacks. And generally that, I think it comes down to, like we were just talking about in the quote that I just read, good communication, good policies, and then thereafter good communication, sort of like leveling with people, being able to get on the phone with them, explain what's going on and try to work through it together. And I think people have they have a good deal of empathy for what's going on with the situation, as long as they feel like they're being dealt with in kind of an above board way, and that everything's transparent, and everyone's trying to kind of work together to come to a resolution that hopefully, once the world returns to normal, we'll be back on track.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think that, like you said, the communication piece is so key. Like just making sure that you are communicating with your client, and it's a crappy situation. Nobody asked for this. Nobody wants to be in this situation. I think that's the biggest thing to keep in mind when you're, dealing with a business situation yourself or with the other people, that just remembering like nobody asked for this, nobody wished this upon themselves and that sort of thing. And I
Yeah.
think too, it's just as you were talking, it was reminding me of how important it is to have like your back end paperwork organized. I know for me, like I love the business side of yoga. I'm really passionate about it, but I'm definitely more passionate about the strategy and the branding and than I am about like the paperwork and the legal side and the logistics. But
Yeah.
it's so important to have your contracts organized between you and the center that you're giving money to, between you and your clients. Having a clear refund policy is so important. And I think that, this, if anything, is like a perfect example of why you need this type of stuff, because this wasn't something that any of us can control. And you have to make sure you have that stuff clear and organized.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so we touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to go into it more in depth. How are people feeling about the future? Like, are people feeling optimistic? Do they feel like the industry will rebound? What are kind of their thoughts and feelings on that?
Yeah, so I think to let's take the future into like 2021. People saw 27% of people kind of still aren't sure by 2021 how what their outlook is. I think that one asterisk put in front of all of this is just there's still a lot of uncertainty. But if you look at kind of the majority of respondents for first half of next year, 22% said they had a positive outlook, 17% said they had a fair outlook, 20% somewhat negative, and 14 say negative. So it's sort of like, and then beyond that, if you look into the second half of the year, things continue to get better. And I think generally, I think something like 60% of our respondents believe kind of in a large scale industry recovery within a year. And then there's another 25% beyond that think it'll be somewhere between kind of 12 and 18 months. So basically, people are attuned to the reality that 2020 has been a rough year, and the first half of 2021, there is some uncertainty, but people are pretty cautiously optimistic that that's kind of when the return to normalcy will really start to pick up momentum. And certainly by the second half of next year, I think a lot of people see that as kind of it's not the new normal, but we'll have managed out of this and kind of have a path to the way forward by then. So I think there is uncertainty, but like I said, there's especially interesting relative to tour operators in general. I think on the wellness and retreat side of things, I think there's a hope, and I think it's really well-founded hope that when people are able to leave their immediate four walls and their, recent cities again, that one of the first things people may really, really be craving in travel is travel that feels safe and supported and nurturing and, benefit to the body and mind, because we've all been through a lot physically, psychologically, in all ways coming through this. And so in discussions I've had with people and also just personal belief wise, I think that travel that has an angle on us taking, attuning ourselves to self-care and and healing our minds and our bodies after this sort of frankly traumatic experience. I think a lot of people are actually craving that kind of travel. And so I think it poises our niche of the travel industry to come back a little bit better than certain other types, which I think is, is very reasonable optimism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. And Ryan and I, my husband and I, just actually did a podcast interview for the World Wonders this morning, so it's not out on our feed yet. But we were talking with the founder of Dollar Flight Club, and he's done a lot of research on flight trends, just because they've been around for a while and they've been able to kind of analyze like the trends and patterns from, the depression in 2008 and what happened with 9/11, and just analyzing like how the industry's kind of picked up. And both of those events are good examples of the travel industry recovering. And I guess from their analysis, they were kind of looking at like, people are starting to slowly book stuff, and it's not for 2020. It's like people are looking ahead to 2021. Flights are really well priced right now.
Yeah.
Countries, as they're recovering, some of them are opening up to tourism, encouraging people to book trips for the future. Again, not right now, for the future. And they want tourists to come and enjoy those places. And so I think based on what I know and kind of how I feel, I agree with you. I think that there's going to be, I don't know if things are going to return to normal, as they were before. I don't know, if everyone's going to want to travel, but I definitely feel like when I think about travel, I think going on a yoga retreat sounds like a really refreshing way to kickstart travel again, especially if there is uncertainty or fear. Travel is going to be stressful, I think, once we get back to it, like having to wear masks and potentially having to distance. And maybe there's going to be extra rules and regulations for the first little bit as we kind of enter the world again. But I think going and spending, a week on a beach in Costa Rica, refreshing, recharging, not checking my emails sounds like exactly what I want to do once I can leave my house again.
Yeah. Well, I think that retreat leaders are, they tend to be sensitive, thoughtful people, and I think that they've gone through, we've all mutually gone through this experience together, and we've lived through isolation, social isolation, a lot of grief and anxiety and fear, and these are people that are, they're well positioned in terms of how they think about putting together their offerings to make sure that what they offer next sort of speaks to that reality. And I have another quote, if you don't mind, I'll share from another
Yeah, of
client.
course.
And she said, she works for a nonprofit. She said, "This has been an important moment for our organization to slow down, to take time to review all of our offerings and look to the way our nonprofit is run. The gift so far have been the direct contact with all of our clients and guests, getting to know them better and integrating their insights into our future planning." So, yeah, again, one blessing of this downtime, I mean, there haven't been a ton, but one silver lining is just that it's given a lot of us to kind of take a moment to take a pause and to think about all the things that we're spending our money, or excuse me, our time on, and
Mhm.
time and money, all of our resources on, and just kind of reevaluate what's working well, what's not, and to ask people, how is this fitting with what you need? I've heard that really across the board. And so I think this sort of like thoughtful, mindful approach to resuming travel, again, our industry sits in a place to really hopefully bring some of that sensitivity and insight to the forefront when the next generation of retreat experiences are putting together. Hopefully they're even richer for all of that kind of time that's been spent in conversation and in trying to kind of reflect on what's the best way forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that quote. So thank you for sharing that. And I think it's interesting, for me personally, I worked online before and I've continued to work online, and it's absolutely a blessing to have, a thriving business and to have work right now. And I fully understand that. I haven't been the camp of people who is, you know, I've been watching Netflix during the day, which sometimes I'm a bit bitter about, but most of the time I'm grateful for. And I think even like still having full-time work and still being very busy, I think just the nature of where we're at right now does give you time to kind of slow down and reconsider, because it's not just, social event after social event after, you know, oh, I can't go for dinner this weekend, but I have time like 3 weekends from now. So much of, I feel like my life prior to this was being booked out constantly, having adventures that was going on and traveling like a crazy person. And it's been really nice to just have weekends where I sit back at home and have this time to reflect on, my life personally and also my life professionally. And I think that, as a business owner, I think it's a great time to kind of sit back and look at what you're doing and be like, is this serving me going forward? And in this, new world, as we kind of reawake and get back to things, what was working well, what wasn't? Like, do I like what I was doing? Do I want to do something different? And I think that 100% people sitting in the health and wellness space and retreat leaders have a beautiful opportunity to show people the world in, or maybe even their own backyards. Like maybe that's something that will be a trend coming up. And I know we'll talk about this shortly, but it's interesting to think about how we have this beautiful opportunity to give people a really great experience. And we certainly always had it as retreat leaders, but I think more than ever, at least what I'm hearing is like people need yoga, and people need the mindfulness and the spirituality and the centering and coming together as a community. And I think people are going to be excited to be able to go on yoga treats, hopefully.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, that's exactly right. I think the industry is coming back. There's no doubt about that. There's plenty of us, both on the participant side and the host side, that are eager for this to open back up. I do think that there are going to be some kind of major changes, especially as the world opens back up. I think first we're going to see a return to destinations that are close to home, where people can
Mhm.
use kind of their own private transportation to get there. I think we'll see more kind of remote. Generally, retreat centers are fairly remote, but I think a premium on remote destinations where on the property there's plenty of room to like space out, do walking meditations, not necessarily have like buffet style meals. So just sort of like, the social distancing involved in practicing may be scaled back a little bit from what we're doing today, but still not kind of people right on top of each other all the time, less urban kind of destinations. And then like contactless online payments. This doesn't, I mean, obviously you pay for a retreat, generally that's online or it's virtual anyway, but I think contactless payments in airports, in transit, anywhere that tourism infrastructure can kind of support that. I think we're going to see a move towards more of that. Um, I think one thing that people have in mind, just given the kind of upheaval that our natural world has been put into with this whole pandemic, it's highly related to just how do we treat, the natural world and how in tune are we with keeping things in balance. And a close extension of that is just kind of what our ecological footprint is when we travel. So being kind to Mother Earth, making sure that we're traveling in a way that's sustainable and doesn't harm local communities or local sort of ecological structures. I think that will be more important to people. Um, I think also, unfortunately, we're going to see retreat centers that go through financial difficulties, maybe change management. So I would just say anybody who's got contracts in place, even if you've been there before, make sure you sort of know who's at the helm if you're returning, and make sure that the quality and standards of service are kind of in line with what you'd expect from your experience having been there before. Basically, just don't assume. um, One last thought is just on like travel and retreat insurance. That whole market has been in upheaval. I heard a podcast, or not a podcast, I heard a webinar last week where a few different industry experts were just speculating on like what is the travel insurance industry going to look like coming out. And it was sort of like, well, it's going to be a lot tighter. Like cancel for no reason policies are pretty much either out the window or going to be super expensive. And travel insurance is it's kind of just shut down as an industry for the moment, but they're speculating on like how's it going to be when it comes back. And the industry is definitely, I think they predict greater alignment between people wanting and needing to buy travel insurance, but also reading their policies a lot more carefully, and maybe being willing to pay a little extra for a policy that exactly matches their expectations, maybe shopping around a little bit more instead of just buying the first thing that they see. And on retreat leaders' part, maybe doing a little more homework into if you're bringing everybody from a certain geography, North America or Canada to Zimbabwe or whatever, just having either this is the policy I require that you buy or strongly recommend that you buy, or if you have participants coming from different parts of the world, going to Zimbabwe or whatever, because their home countries will probably dictate different carriers that they're able to access. Just a checklist of like, here's all the things you should make sure when you're shopping for a policy that ideally should be covered. So probably just a little bit more savvy, both on the consumer end and a little bit more guidance from retreat leaders going into looking at insurance, because that whole industry is going to change and it's not quite certain what it's going to look like on the other side. But I think everybody will be better served by like reading fine print in a way that they maybe didn't do before. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I think that that's an important one for sure, especially if you're the retreat leader and you're kind of responsible for the recommendation. Like you don't want that to come back and, maybe
yeah,
get sued from somebody who can't get their claim or get sick abroad or something. I mean, that's always important, but
yeah,
I just think more than ever, it's something that we've been reminded of. And for sure, that was a reminder for me. I mean, I always travel with travel insurance. We usually do it through World Nomads, and they're a fantastic company.
yeah, they're great.
But I realized that I didn't know, like, am I covered for an act of God? Am I covered for a pandemic? I have no idea if this covers me or not. And that's a big thing when you are abroad if something like this hits. And I think, certainly for me, and I think most people know, like I've never experienced something like this in my lifetime. And so I keep travel insurance for if I need to go to the hospital or, if my laptop gets stolen, God forbid, or something like that. But I was never aware of like, oh, what if a national or global emergency happens and I need to get home or I get sick? What happens then? And yeah, trying to check out what you've paid for and what you're covered for when you're in another country and you're already in the thing is not a super ideal situation. And I think, yeah, definitely reading the fine print on if you're covered, what you're covered for, et cetera, is going to be super important going forward. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
I really like to what you were saying about just with destinations being closer to home. Like, I think that obviously everything's different country to country, state to state, and countries are slowly reopening at different paces. And even, we were talking before this about how in the US, the states are opening kind of, they have different phases and stuff. And it's the same thing in Canada. It's very much provincial. And I think, of course, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're doing things responsibly. But I think there's a lot of opportunity, maybe even in the next couple of months to be renting an Airbnb and, to getting people outside of the city if you live in a city or getting people to a lake house or a cottage. That's the type of stuff that I think I'm certainly craving. And I think that a lot of people are is just being able to kind of get away and not think about what's happening in the world for a couple of days and really tune into themselves, breath, eat some nourishing food, have some nourishing conversation. And certainly maybe it looks different, no buffets, contactless stuff, maybe less hugging. I know as
Yeah.
yogis, we all like to hug, but
No,
might be
yeah.
a while before we're allowed to do that again. But I
Yeah.
think there's like definitely opportunities within, our little communities, just depending on where you are.
Yes. No, I totally agree on that. It's like, be responsible, follow the dictates of whatever your leaders locally and nationally are saying. But at the same time, as it starts to open up, if online was version 1.0 coming out of this, I see what you were describing very much as like version 2.0, and we'll kind of slowly build back up as it's safe to like, the new normal, but the world where we're actually able to get on planes again and not, fear public transportation and not fear crowded spaces. That's all a little ways off, but it is, we are going to come back there, and yeah, and hopefully all of these, lessons we've learned about just being thoughtful about ecological footprint, sustainability, getting proper insurance, making sure communication around policies is loud and clear. These are all great lessons that, regardless of the setbacks that have come through during COVID-19, they're all really good things to keep in mind, regardless of the future climate. So I feel like some of these things have just been tough lessons, but good lessons universally. And yeah, and if you don't mind, I have one more quote, Amanda, I wanted to share because I think this one, like for me,
Yeah.
sums it up really well. A woman I've worked with a long time, she's super seasoned retreat leader, and she said, "I don't think that this is the end of the travel business, only the beginning of a new way of doing things. I'm still figuring things out, but I'm still hopeful that, like a slingshot, the more things that retract, the greater forward movement will follow." So yeah, we've definitely retracted quite a bit, but I do think we're kind of poised to just, shoot ahead into the future in an optimistic way. But like we were just saying, responsibly, slowly, appropriately, and with all this kind of insight that we've been forced, for better or worse, to gain, and perspective that we've been forced to gain over the last weeks and months here.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that quote. So thank you for sharing that. That's a really beautiful quote. And I totally agree. I think it is, maybe letting go of what we were doing before and considering what, the travel space and the yoga retreat space is going to look like going forward. And I think talking to your people, talking to the students that are coming on your retreats with you and finding out how they're feeling, where they want to go, what concerns they have, and really knowing that you have this opportunity to nurture them in a beautiful way. Because I think that it's just from some of the conversations I've had, like for example, with my parents who are, they're in their late 50s, so they're not, I guess, like super high on the what's the word I'm looking for? Like they're not super high to be sick from the virus. I guess but they're definitely, in in a demographic that's more likely to get it and maybe be sick than like me, for example, because I'm in my early 30s. And, they've definitely talked about how this is impacting their thoughts on travel and how they want to stick to North America for the next couple of years as things kind of like pan out from this. And I think that understanding like what your people are thinking and feeling and knowing that you have an opportunity to like give them a travel experience, whether or not it's in your backyard or maybe in a country close to home or a country that you've always wanted to go to that is a remote destination, and think about how you can do it responsibly, both from making sure that people are safe and then also looking at our environmental impact. Because that's certainly, it's been a big conversation, I think, in the travel space for a while, but we're so go 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 all the time. At least I was.
Yeah.
It's like we're constantly on to the next thing. And it's like we don't really take the opportunity to just sit back and kind of digest what we're doing and think about how we could maybe do it better. And I think that this has certainly given us this opportunity.
Yes. Yeah. Big challenge, but big opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think with it all, it's like I try to look for like the little silver linings and have, some forms of optimism. And I think that with every great thing that comes out of this, I see, a lot of things that aren't great, people losing loved ones and challenges around not being able to see family and friends. I mean, that's certainly impacting people in a deep level. Yoga studios closing, businesses closing, restaurants
Yeah.
closing. I mean, that stuff is awful. And again, I think it's like nobody asked for this. And I think I'm just looking at it from the lens of like, okay, we've been given this situation. We can fight back against it and push against it, or we can look at how we can come out of it, maybe a little bit differently and maybe a little bit better.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We have a comment here. It says, so much uncertainty for sure. I have a friend in the travel industry and it's really interesting. Some people are booking, others are really holding back. Yeah, I think that's definitely been what I'm hearing too. And I'd love to hear kind of you, Jen, are you hearing from people about like some people are holding back, some people are booking, or what's been your experience with that?
Yeah, and it's interesting because it comes down to what you're like. There's so many layers. Like part of it's just psychology, right? Some people are far less like, risk averse because of their age or because of their health, condition or how much they've traveled before, and so they're like, oh, I've personally been to this country. I feel comfortable there. I feel like I would be able to navigate and get to a hospital without too much trouble if something went wrong. Um, so there are people that just naturally less risk averse, and then I think also the media in whichever place you're sitting in. Even our own media here, and I live in the Bay Area in California. Some days it just seems really dire, and like we're way back at square one, and then other days the news is so much better. We're coming up on a vaccine. It just kind of depends on the media that you're listening to, locally and internationally. And what's happening on a day-to-day basis with airlines, for example. That's a big one, and governments working with the airlines. I have a brother-in-law who works as a pilot, and I'll say he's in the camp of this is very uncertain. He never knows, what capacity his airline is going to be flying at in a month or 2 months or 3 months, and if he's going to be, mostly working or mostly sitting around. Yeah, so the
Mm.
uncertainty is real, and I think people that are trying to plan and forge ahead are trying to just, work responsibly under a large degree of uncertainty, which is hard. But like we talked about, there's certain ways you can mitigate some of the risk, and you can plan to come back a little bit sooner by doing that. Or you can say, hey, no, I really want to go for the original retreat experience that I had in my head a year ago plus. I'm going to punt it, out into the future long enough that I can do that. And yeah, and kind of everything in between. So there's no right or wrong approach. It's just sort of do your homework and talk to your participants and get as much
Mhm.
information as you can and try to make a responsible judgment based on all that. And I mean, frankly, that's all any of us are able to do. But when you come together in community like this and talk, and talk and hear and share what you've been hearing in the press and among other retreat leaders, I also think that's why our online communities right now are a great place to continue opening the lines of communication, because yeah, there is just a lot of uncertainty still, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I completely agree with that. And I think, yeah, from, a couple travelers that I've talked to, I've talked to a lot of people who are just like, I'm just not traveling for the rest of 2020. And I think that that's, I don't want to say with 100% certainty, but that's definitely, where my husband and I are kind of sitting at right now. Like, we're not going to try to force going to places. Um, one, we want to be cognizant of those places if we're welcome, if it's safe for us to go there, and not necessarily for us, but for the other people there. I think it's thinking a lot about the other people that you are interacting with. And I think it's like a test of patience. I mean, I was, like I said, supposed to be in Europe. I would love to be in Europe right now, but I'm just taking it as
Yeah.
like the universe has handed me an opportunity to be at home. So what can I do with this time that's going to benefit me and my business? And,
Yeah.
hopefully other people can have that too. And it's hard. It's like, this is like the yoga off the mat for me personally.
Yeah, especially for people who love to travel and are called to be sort of nomadic. Yeah, it's quite the practice to adapt to this new reality. I completely agree with that.
For sure. We have another question. It says, do you think there's a way to host retreats virtually for those who can't do in-person events?
Yeah, absolutely. We can share in either the show notes or the comments below the Facebook Live. But I've written an article, and Amanda, share if you have any other resources about kind of taking your offerings online from the perspective of what kind of programs go best online, what are the right technological platforms to support kind of your programming and your goals, how do you distribute it, how do you edit if you need to, and a whole bunch of other how do you take payments, a whole bunch of other questions. So I can definitely share that article with whoever's chiming in here. But yeah, it takes a little bit of kind of self education, but luckily, since we're now 2 months into this, there's a ton of insight and information online, including this article I'm mentioning, that can kind of help you along. So you're definitely not alone. And the good news is I've seen a lot of people do it really, really successfully. So there's no reason that can't be you too.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I would definitely agree with that. And I'd love if you could share those resources for sure with myself and with listeners also. And it's interesting. I've seen people doing a variety of different things. I know at the yoga studio that I work with here in Canmore, we did like a kind of like a mini afternoon retreat, and it was like a yoga nidra kind of treat yourself retreat. And it was something that the teacher would normally do pretty much the same time frame, like maybe a little bit longer. I think it was 3 hours. Maybe she'd do like more of a 1 to 5 type thing. Um, and it was amazing. It was awesome. I got to go and like I just did like breath work and yeah, yoga nidra, and I felt so rejuvenated after. And I did it like entirely from pretty much where I'm sitting. Like I'm actually sitting on the ground on a bolster, and I've got my mic propped up with this little arm thing, and I just did it here. And then I also did another more of like a workshop. It was 2.5 hours, and it was like a yoga massage rolling, and it was great. Like I'm pretty much just getting to do the things that could have done in person but online. And the vibe is different, but it's still amazing to be connected to community, to learn something, to relax, to rejuvenate, all that type of good stuff. And like I said before, my friend has been doing these like themed retreats, and they're just day long, and she does different, I think she did like Costa Rica and then Japan. It's been pretty cool though, and it looks like it's been pretty well attended. They're priced super reasonable. I mean, you'd never get to go to Japan for like $35, so
Oh, I love hearing about those stories. Yeah. No, I've heard some really creative people get really creative with virtual formats. And so, yeah, it's definitely possible, and happy to share some of the resources that I think would be helpful when we have like comments or show notes or whatever to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay, Shannon, I thought it was you. I was like, based on I know the way you write, I thought it was you. So thank you for being here. Shannon Crow says hi. She said she'd love to see the link for that. So yes, we can drop it in the comments after. I'm a little bit new to StreamYard, and I don't think I could do it on the back end here. But once we finish this up, we'll make sure that the link is posted for that. And then, of course, it'll be in the show notes for you guys to check out. We've got a whole list of resources. So Jen and I will make sure that that's there for everyone to check out. And if you're not listening live or tuning in live, yeah, they'll be on the website as always. So thanks for that. Cool. Does anybody else have any questions out there watching? Anything else? Comments? Anything like that? Any thoughts before Jen and I wrap this up? It's been really fun to chat about this. I'm really enjoying the conversations kind of about what the future looks like. And of course, there's so much uncertainty, like we've talked about a lot in this, and we don't know what's going to happen, and we don't know what things are going to look like. But I feel like these types of conversations make me feel hopeful for what's to come, and just hopeful for businesses and, yoga teachers, retreat leaders, and all people who have been impacted by this.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. We're all like, can't say it enough, but we're all in it together. And yeah, as much we can do to kind of support and share best practices and just be in community and talk to each other. Hopefully that makes nobody feel like they're navigating through such crazy times wholly by themselves. Um, so yeah, thanks to
Yeah.
everyone listening.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I totally agree with that. I've kind of felt like right from the beginning, like the only way we get out of this is together. So, we really need each other right now more
Yeah,
than ever because we're not in physical contact. And as humans, I feel like we're really meant to be in groups and with other people and stuff. And I think that as, business owners, small business owners, yoga teachers, like coming together to see how we can support one another is a great thing. I've seen lots of stuff going around about supporting, small businesses in your community. And likewise, if you have a yoga teacher that's offering an online retreat, like it, share it, comment it, um, do what you can do to support, even if it's not financially, monetarily, or if you're not interested in going, you might know somebody that is. And that stuff goes a long, long way.
yeah,
Like it goes a huge way for people. So, supporting as many other people as you can is really great.
yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Jen, this has been so fun. Thanks for being my very first live podcast interview. Hopefully, I've
Thank
done
you.
everything right here. And
Yeah.
hopefully, this will be on the podcast feed in a couple of weeks. If people want to learn more about WeTravel or yourself, where can they go to find you?
You can look us up at wetravel.com. And I think I'll put in the show notes. There's just like some resources on our blog. Our blog is wetravel.com/stories, but I'll give a little better navigation to the most relevant stuff to retreat leaders in the notes. And otherwise, yeah, we have a private Facebook group. You can find us, Retreat Leader Hub We Travel on Facebook. Yeah, and we've got all the channels, but I won't bore you with all the social media channels. Yeah, just check out our website if you're interested in our product. You can always get in touch with me, Jen at wetravel.com, if you have any specific questions about what I talked about or what our business does. And then that Facebook group, the WeTravel Retreat Leader Hub, is also a good community to just be ask questions back and forth and share information and resources and everything else with people that are involved in wellness and retreats and all that good stuff. So yeah, thank you, Amanda, for having me on. It's really, really fun to reconnect after a while, and it was fun to do this live. I was a little nervous, but I think we made it through it.
Yeah, no, we did it. You did great. And thank you so much for this. And yeah, we'll put everything in the comments. And then, of course, things will be in the show notes as well.
Awesome.
All
Great.
right. Thanks for
Thank
everyone who
you.
tuned in. Bye,
Bye,
guys.
everyone.